A woman is unfairly dismissed, but everything changes when she moves into an abandoned house. If you enjoy heartwarming and emotional stories, make sure to subscribe to our channel to follow this one to the end. The warm lights reflected off Amsterdam's historic canals, casting a golden glow that Sanne watched every evening as she left work. For many, the scene would be enchanting, but for her, it was just another reminder of how life seemed to move forward while she remained stuck in the same place. As a single mother, Sanne knew that every extra hour she worked at the restaurant meant more food on the table for her 4-year-old son, Tejan. Sanne worked tirelessly at Harm's restaurant, a bustling hotspot for both tourists and locals. Despite the exhausting pace, she approached everything with dedication. She carried heavy trays, cleaned tables, and even helped in the kitchen when needed. To her colleagues, she was reliable and helpful, but not everyone viewed her that way. Eline, Harm's wife, was a constant presence in the restaurant, her gaze cold and filled with distrust. She scrutinized Sanne's every move with a critical eye, seemingly searching for something to fault her for. It was no secret that Eline was jealous of any woman who came too close to her husband. That evening, as Sanne finished closing the register under Eline's watchful gaze, something unexpected happened. Harm entered the room abruptly, with Eline close behind, holding an envelope. "Sanne, can we talk?" Harm's voice was serious, an unusual tone for him. Sanne nodded, her heart pounding. The restaurant was empty except for the three of them. Harm opened the envelope and poured its contents onto the table, a few euro notes and a checkbook bearing the restaurant's logo. "This was found in your bag, Sanne. Can you explain?" Eline's accusatory tone cut through the air like a knife. Sanne froze, staring at the items in disbelief. "This isn't mine. I would never take anything from here," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. Eline crossed her arms. "Then how did it end up in your bag?" "Harm, she's lying." Harm hesitated, clearly torn, but Eline's words carried weight. He sighed and looked away. "Sanne, regardless of how this happened, it's serious. We can't have you here anymore." "But I didn't do anything." Sanne insisted, tears streaming down her face. "Please, just leave before this gets worse," Eline said, her voice devoid of empathy. That night, Sanne left the restaurant carrying not only her bag but also the heavy burden of injustice weighing her down. On her way home, the streets felt colder and emptier than ever. Her mind swirled with questions: how had this happened? And more importantly, how would she now provide for Tejan? When she arrived at her small apartment, Tejan was already asleep, cared for by the kind neighbor who always helped in emergencies. Sanne sat at the kitchen table, her eyes fixed on a pile of bills. She needed a plan. Despair crept in, but a tiny spark of determination began to grow. "They won't break me," she thought. As the clock ticked into the early hours, Sanne started mapping out her options. She knew life had a cruel way of testing the strong, and even as the tears continued to fall, she made a promise to herself: she would find a way to start over. The day dawned overcast in Limburg, with a palpable tension in the air that Sanne couldn't ignore. Ruben was quieter than usual, focused on his documents and notes. He had finally pieced together much of the evidence that exposed the corruption scheme involving local politicians and businessmen, but he knew that releasing it would put everyone at risk. "Are you ready?" Sanne asked, noticing him reviewing the papers on the table for the 100th time. Ruben looked up at her, his eyes filled with concern. "Almost. I just need one last piece of the puzzle. A specific name to tie everything together. I think one of the village councillors has the information, but getting to him won't be easy." Sanne could tell he was hesitant to ask for help, but she knew exactly what he meant. The small village made Ruben an outsider, a suspicious one at that, but Sanne, with her growing interactions with the locals, might be able to get something he couldn't. "You want me to find out?" she asked, crossing her arms. Ruben hesitated before replying. "I don't want to put you in danger, but you're the only one they trust." Despite the fear, Sanne nodded. Ruben was taking an enormous risk, and she felt that she owed it to him to repay the trust he had placed in her. Later that afternoon, Sanne went to the local market with Tejan, trying to disguise her anxiety. Amid casual conversations with the villagers, she came across Councillor Jan, a prominent man who regularly attended the market. Councillor Jan, Good morning, she said, forcing a friendly smile. Jan smiled back, but his gaze was sharp, calculating. Sanne, how's the business going? I hear your work is becoming quite popular. Sanne noticed he was trying to sound casual, but she knew he was testing the waters. She decided to seize the opportunity. It's going well, thank you. Though things are always tricky in a small village, aren't they? Especially with all these stories about bigger issues around here. Jan stiffened for a moment but quickly masked it. There's always gossip around here, you know how it is. Sanne tilted her head in agreement, but she managed to catch a slip from the counselor, a name, Hendrik Vos, a businessman who seemed to be at the center of it all. She concealed her curiosity, thanked him for the conversation, and headed home with the information Ruben needed. Ruben was surprised by how quickly and accurately Sanne had gathered the information. Hendrik Vos, that makes sense. He's one of the financiers behind the scheme. This ties everything together. Now that all the pieces were in place, Ruben knew it was time to act. He planned to send the evidence to a national investigative newspaper, but he needed a secure connection to ensure the documents wouldn't be intercepted. Frederick, who had been following the situation closely, offered to help. I have trusted contacts in Maastricht. I can make sure the documents get where they need to go. Ruben hesitated, but eventually accepted the offer. Using his experience and old connections, Frederick managed to send the materials to a well-known journalist. Ruben and Sanne waited anxiously for any news, as the village seemed to be on edge. Days later, the story exploded in the media. Headlines about corruption in Limburg spread across the country. The people involved were soon under investigation, and several were arrested, including businessman Hendrik Vos and a few local politicians. However, the victory didn't come without a cost. One evening, as Sanne and Ruben sat in the garden talking, a dark car passed slowly along the road, its headlights briefly illuminating them before disappearing around the corner. They know it was us, Ruben said, his voice low and grim. Sanne felt the fear resurface, but Ruben took her hand. We're not going to let this intimidate us. The truth is on our side now. The next morning, Frederick received a call from the journalist, who wanted to interview Ruben for a follow-up article. The publicity would provide protection for Ruben, as it would be too risky for those involved to target someone who was now in the spotlight. The interview was published, detailing Ruben's courage and briefly mentioning the help of a woman from the village, keeping Sanne out of the limelight for her safety. With the case finally exposed, the threat began to diminish, but not without leaving emotional scars. Ruben and Sanne knew they had won a dangerous battle, but they emerged from it stronger, trusting each other more than ever before. As Ruben read the article aloud to Tijen, Sanne watched the scene, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. She knew that, despite the challenges, a bright future was now beginning to unfold. 2 days after her dismissal, as Sanne tried to reorganize her routine, the sound of the doorbell echoed through her small apartment. In the hallway, a postman stood holding a formal envelope sealed with the stamp of a notary office in Maastricht. Sanne de Wit, he asked. Yes, that's me. After signing for the delivery, Sanne closed the door and opened the envelope carefully. Inside, on letterhead, was a message that seemed surreal. She had inherited a property in Limburg, left to her by her grandfather Frederick de Wit, someone she hardly knew. Must be a mistake, she thought at first. She hadn't been in contact with Frederick since her childhood and knew very little about him. The last thing she'd heard from her mother before her untimely death was that Frederick was a private man, estranged from the family. Despite her doubts, the letter piqued her curiosity. It could just be an abandoned ruin, but Sanne saw a glimmer of hope in it. She decided to make the trip to Limburg that weekend with Tijen, even though the thought of leaving Amsterdam, even temporarily, was a daunting one. On Saturday morning, Sanne and Tijen boarded a train heading south to the Netherlands. The journey seemed endless to Tijen, who watched the landscape shift from tall buildings to sprawling green fields. As for Sanne, lost in thought, she tried to keep her expectations in check. When they arrived, a small village welcomed them with cobbled streets and old-fashioned houses. Following the instructions in the letter, they found the property, a rural house with weathered brick walls, large windows, and a garden completely overrun with weeds. It's huge, Mum. Tijen exclaimed, running through the neglected yard. To Sanne, it wasn't just huge, it was terrifying. The house had an air of abandonment, as if frozen in time. But at the same time, she saw potential there. As they explored inside, Sanne encountered a mix of dust and old furniture. In the center of the living room stood a stone fireplace. Childhood memories bubbled up, though blurry and distant. It wasn't just a house, it was a piece of her history. However, something felt out of place. While exploring the rooms, Sanne noticed a door to the basement slightly ajar, with recent scuff marks on the floor. Her heart quickened. "Stay here, Tegan," she said, trying to sound calm, but the unease was evident in her voice. She descended the stairs cautiously, the air growing colder and heavier. At the far end of the basement, near a dark corner, she saw something that made her recoil: a man, injured and unconscious. He was in ragged clothes, his shirt soaked in blood, but he was still breathing. Sanne hesitated, but the practical side of her mind took over. "Hey, can you hear me?" she asked, stepping closer. The man's eyes fluttered open, weak but alert. "Don't turn me in, please," he mumbled before slipping back into unconsciousness. Sanne stared at him, torn between fear and the need to act. Something told her this situation wasn't an accident. But one thing was certain: leaving him there was not an option. "Mum. What's going on?" Tegan called from the top of the stairs. Sanne took a deep breath. This was the beginning of something she didn't yet understand. Sanne hurried up the stairs to calm Tegan, who seemed anxious about the delay. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just a little problem in the house that Mum will take care of," she said, trying to sound reassuring. After placing Tegan in one of the rooms and giving him a toy to distract him, Sanne returned to the basement, carrying a lantern and a first aid kit she had found in a dusty cupboard. The man was still unconscious, but breathing with difficulty. She approached cautiously, shining the light more clearly on his face. He was young, maybe in his 30s, with messy brown hair and a scruffy beard. The wound on his shoulder looked serious, and his clothes were torn. Kneeling beside him, Sanne examined the injury. Although she had no medical experience, she knew she had to clean the wound. She used the little warm water she'd managed to heat in the kitchen and began tending to the injury, drawing soft groans of pain from the man. "Who are you? What happened?" she asked, more to herself than to him. Once she finished cleaning the wound, the man opened his eyes, weak, but more alert. He tried to sit up, but winced in pain and collapsed back down. "No. Please, don't turn me in," he whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "Calm down, no one's going to turn you in. But you need to tell me what's going on. Who did this to you?" Sanne asked, her tone firm but trying not to sound threatening. He looked at her for a moment, as if deciding whether or not he could trust her. "My name is Ruben. I'm a journalist. I was investigating something big. Important people. They found me, and they attacked me." Sanne felt a chill run down her spine. His words seemed to carry a dangerous weight. "What do you mean by something big?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper, as if the walls might be listening. "Corruption in Limburg. Politicians, businessmen, they are all involved. I was about to expose it all, but they came after me before I could break the story." Sanne stared at the man in front of her, trying to process the information. He seemed genuine, but what did it mean for her? Was hiding him there putting her and Tegan at risk? And now? "Do they know where you are?" Ruben shook his head, though with difficulty. "No. I managed to shake them off before I got here. But I need somewhere to hide until I regain my strength. Please, I have nowhere else to go." Sanne hesitated. The idea of sheltering a complete stranger, especially someone involved in something so dangerous, seemed insane. But something in his eyes, the way he pleaded, touched a part of her that understood what it was like to be without support, without resources. "All right. You can stay. But only for now," she said, finally. Ruben let out a sigh of relief and closed his eyes, exhausted. Over the next few days, Sanne balanced taking care of Tegan with looking after Ruben. He needed fresh bandages every day and light meals to regain his strength. At first, he barely spoke, but little by little, he began to share more about his investigation. They are stealing millions, all while pretending to help small communities like this. It's all a facade, and anyone who tries to stand up to them ends up like me, Ruben explained, his voice still weak. Sanne didn't know much about corruption or investigations, but she listened attentively. Though she remained cautious, Ruben was slowly earning her trust. One night, while Ruben rested on the makeshift sofa in the basement, Sanne went upstairs. Watching Tejan sleep, she felt a pang of fear. Had she done the right thing by helping him? The sound of a car passing on the street interrupted her thoughts. Sanne looked out the window, her heart racing. It was just a local resident, but the moment reminded her that danger was very real. How did I get myself into this, she thought. But by now, there was no turning back. The sun slowly rose over Limburg, casting a soft golden hue across the fields. After restless nights caring for Ruben and trying to reorganize her new reality, Sanne finally experienced a brief moment of peace. As she prepared breakfast, she reflected on how her life had become an uncontrollable roller coaster. Ruben, now more recovered, climbed the basement stairs slowly. He was still pale, but there was a renewed determination in his eyes. "You're looking better," Sanne said, placing a cup of tea on the table. "Thanks to you." "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done," Ruben replied, his voice still hoarse but filled with gratitude. Sanne shrugged. "I just hope this is over soon. I've got a son to protect." Ruben nodded, understanding her concern. In the days that followed, Ruben started helping Sanne with small repairs around the house, a way of repaying her hospitality. He also spent time organizing his notes and rebuilding what he had lost during the attack. Gradually, the two began to talk more. During one of their conversations, while Ruben explained the details of his investigation, he noticed some old clothes hanging in one of the rooms. "These clothes are amazing. Did you make these?" he asked, picking up a traditional Dutch dress with intricate embroidery. Sanne smiled, a little embarrassed. "No, those were my mother's. But I used to sew when I was younger. After Tejan was born, it became a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. You should start again. You've got talent." Sanne laughed, but the idea lingered in her mind. That afternoon, while Tejan played in the garden, she pulled her old sewing machine out of a forgotten box in the closet. It was old, but still worked. With a scrap of fabric she found in the basement, she began to experiment. At first, her hands were shaky, unaccustomed to the delicate work, but soon the familiarity returned. She spent hours there, creating something she didn't quite know the purpose of yet. When she finished, she held up a little blouse for Tejan, patterned after the fields surrounding them. "Mum, is that for me?" Tejan asked, delighted, when he saw the piece. "Yes, sweetheart. What do you think?" "It's beautiful," he said, proudly putting on the blouse and running through the garden. Tejan's reaction warmed Sanne's heart. For the first time in a long while, she felt that she had created something new, something of her own. Ruben, who had been watching from a distance, approached her. "You've got a gift, Sanne. Have you thought about doing more of this? Maybe selling them?" The idea seemed absurd at first. But that night, while tidying up before bed, Sanne began to imagine the possibilities. Ruben was right. Limburg attracted tourists all the time, and maybe there was a market for something authentic, handmade. The next day, Sanne went to the local market to see if she could find more materials. Ruben accompanied her, insisting that she needed to learn how to negotiate with confidence. "I'll watch you, but next time, you need to ask for a discount," he joked, making Sanne laugh. Gradually, Sanne started producing small items, aprons, scarves, and children's dresses, inspired by traditional Dutch styles. When she set up a small stall at the village market, to her surprise, the pieces caught attention almost immediately. "This is amazing work," said one woman, buying 2 scarves. "Are you from here?" "Not exactly, but I'm trying to start over here," Sanne replied, smiling. With Ruben's support, who helped promote the pieces on local social media, the small project began to grow. It was a tentative step, but for the first time in a long while, Sanne felt like she was regaining control over her life. Still, part of her knew that the situation with Ruben was far from resolved. He was a constant, ever-present figure, growing increasingly close, but the danger he carried still loomed like a shadow. That night, as they watched Tejan sleep, Ruben spoke in a serious tone. "Sanne, I need to finish what I started. I want to expose these people, but for that, I'll need your help." Sanne looked at him, surprised. "My help? How? You know the village, the people here. There's information that only someone local could uncover. If you help me, I promise I'll make sure no one touches you or Tejan." It was a risky proposition, but Ruben made her feel something new, the chance to fight for something bigger. And so, once again, Sanne found herself torn between fear and the need to do what was right. While Sanne was still mulling over Ruben's proposal, another unexpected matter arose. The next morning, as she opened the letterbox at the house, she found a letter from a familiar sender, Frederick de Witt. The name brought a wave of emotions. Her grandfather, who had until then seemed like a ghost from the past, now wanted to reconnect. Sanne opened the letter with trembling hands. Frederick expressed regret for distancing himself from the family and said he wanted to make amends, starting by meeting her and getting to know Tejan. He mentioned that he had discovered her existence through the registry office and asked if he could visit her at the house in Limburg. "Frederick," Sanne murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Ruben, who had been in the living room, noticed her unease. "Is something wrong?" he asked. Sanne explained, hesitating as she recounted Frederick's history. He had severed ties with her mother decades ago, claiming she had chosen a lifestyle he did not approve of. Since then, there had been no contact. And now he wants to come back, just like that? After everything? Sanne said, her voice laced with anger. Ruben nodded, but cautiously. Sometimes, people realize their mistakes too late. The question is, are you willing to listen to him? Sanne didn't respond immediately. The wounds were deep, but at the same time, she couldn't ignore the possibility that Frederick might be genuinely remorseful. Days later, Frederick arrived at the door. He was an elderly man, with a stiff posture, but his tired eyes carried an emotional weight that was hard to miss. "Sanne," he said, his voice soft. She stared at him for a long moment before opening the door wider. "Come in," she replied, trying to keep her tone neutral. Frederick looked around the house, as if revisiting memories of a long-forgotten past. He sat down in the living room, nervous, while Sanne crossed her arms, waiting for an explanation. "I wasn't the man I should have been for your mother, or for you," he said. "I was wrong to distance myself, to judge instead of offering support. And now, with the little time I have left, I want to try and put things right." His words carried weight, but Sanne remained steadfast. "Do you think a few words can erase everything that's happened? The years of silence? The hardships I faced not even knowing I had more family?" Frederick lowered his eyes. "I don't expect you to forgive me straight away. I just want to be here for you and Tejan. I want to help, in any way I can." At that moment, Tejan appeared in the living room, holding a toy car. "Who's he, Mummy?" he asked, his innocent curiosity apparent. Sanne hesitated for a moment but decided to be honest. "This is Frederick, your grandfather." Tejan smiled and ran over to show the man his toy, completely unaware of the tension in the air. Frederick looked moved, his eyes glistening as he gazed at his grandson. In the days that followed, Frederick made a point of proving his sincerity. He helped with small repairs around the house and brought simple gifts for Tejan, attempting to become a regular presence. Sanne, still skeptical, watched from a distance. Ruben, noticing her difficulty in handling her grandfather's return, offered some advice. "You have every right to be hurt. But sometimes, forgiveness isn't about what the other person deserves, it's about what you need to move forward." These words stayed with Sanne. Frederick also made a practical offer. He wanted to invest in Sanne's small sewing business, helping her expand. Reluctantly, Sanne accepted. With the additional resources, she was able to buy better fabrics and increase her production, attracting more customers at the village and local market. Over time, the barriers between Sanne and Frederick began to break down. It wasn't an instant forgiveness, but a slow and sincere process. she began to see her grandfather not as the man who had hurt her, but as someone desperately trying to right his wrongs. One afternoon, as they worked together in the garden, Frederick approached Sanne. "Thank you for letting me be a part of this," he said, looking at the house, which now seemed more alive. Sanne sighed and nodded. "I don't know if I can forget what happened. But maybe it's time to let the past go." Frederick smiled, and at that moment, Sanne felt a part of the weight she had been carrying slowly lifting. However, despite the progress in their relationship, Sanne knew that the greatest challenge was still ahead. Ruben still had to face the enemies who were pursuing him, and Sanne was about to become more involved than she could ever have imagined. Fragmented Memories was now alive with vibrancy. The walls had been repainted, the garden bloomed with color, and the interior hummed with creativity. Sanne had transformed it into a workshop where she crafted her traditional Dutch garments and welcomed curious customers, locals and tourists alike. Ruben was by her side, fully recovered and thriving. His investigation had not only brought justice but also cemented his reputation as an investigative journalist. Frederick was a constant presence too, helping Sanne organize cultural events on the property, which brought even more attention to her growing business. "Who would have thought, eh?" Frederick said, looking around while holding Tijan's hand. Sanne smiled, her pride shining through. "It still feels surreal sometimes, but I'm happy it all worked out." Ruben approached, holding a list of recent orders. "Looks like we're in for a busy week," he said with a playful wink at Sanne. Despite the fast pace of their lives, the atmosphere at the house was serene. The connection between Sanne and Ruben had deepened naturally, and together, they were building a strong family. Frederick, now a devoted grandfather, was an unexpected but cherished support system that Sanne had come to treasure every day. One day, as they worked in the workshop, Ruben paused for a moment and looked at Sanne. "Do you realize how much we've accomplished?" he asked. Sanne glanced up from her sewing machine. "Sometimes it still feels like a dream." Ruben knelt beside her and held her hands. "It's not just about what we've achieved. It's about who we've become. You saved me, Sanne. Not just in that basement, but every single day since." Sanne felt her eyes well up with tears, though they were of joy. "And you showed me I could dream again," she replied with a radiant smile. Months later, a new chapter began for Sanne with the birth of her second child, a daughter named Nova. Her name symbolized exactly what Sanne felt, a new beginning, a life full of possibilities. The little family, now larger, embraced each day with gratitude. Frederick was a present and loving grandfather. Ruben balanced his career in journalism with life alongside Sanne, and Tijan, proud as ever, told everyone he was a big brother. That evening, as they gazed at the stars in the garden, Sanne reflected on everything she had learned since her life had fallen apart. "Ruben, do you know what all this has taught me?" He looked at her, intrigued. "That I'm stronger than I ever imagined. Life tested me in so many ways, but I've realized resilience is the key. There's always a way through." Ruben smiled, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "You faced it all with a courage few people possess." Sanne continued, her gaze fixed on the stars. "I've also learned that no one achieves anything alone. It's the connections we build, the support of the people who care, that carry us through. You, Frederick, even Tijan, each of you was vital." Ruben nodded, watching Tijan run around the garden with a small lantern. "And maybe the most important lesson of all," she said, glancing at Frederick, who was approaching with Nova cradled in his arms, "is that forgiveness holds incredible power. Not just for others, but for ourselves. Forgiving brought me peace." Frederick, visibly moved, stepped closer to Sanne. "You can't imagine what it means to hear that from you." Sanne smiled, reaching out to take his hand. "No matter how much we've faltered in the past, there's always time to start again." As the stars sparkled in the sky, the little family gathered in the garden, talking and laughing. Ruben, Sanne, Tijan, and Nova had found something they once thought impossible: happiness. And so, Sanne realized that the past was now just a story. The present was a chapter of peace, and the future shone brightly, like the stars above them. If you've followed this journey, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories like this.